Hello, welcome to Synchronicity, talk radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Marie Benard, and we're continuing on with our series on boundaries. This is the last in our series, and we're going to be talking about boundaries in relationships, most specifically romantic relationships, but we may spill over into other close friendships. So we're going to be joined again today by Jo-Anne Weiler. She is a registered clinical counselor and registered marriage and family therapist. And welcome back to the show, Jo-Anne.
Hi, Ruby. Nice to talk to you again. And yeah, it's exciting to talk about sort of the pinnacle of everything we do in life, which is falling in love and maintaining lifetime love, with someone, and why it's so important to understand boundaries and how to define clearly what you need so that you can have that long-term, evolving, developing love.
All right. So what's the difference between romantic boundaries and friendship boundaries, work boundaries? Are there differences?
There are. In some ways, I think that we get, we're much more, they matter a lot more, right? I mean, at work, relationships can often mirror kind of family dynamics, and you can actually sort of think of them as a family system. But in romance, it really matters because we've only got one heart. So we really want to be caring for it, expanding it, and also making sure it's not getting trudged on. So I kind of think boundaries when it comes to romantic relationships is there's a bit of an oxymoron in it, because to have closeness and to be intimate with someone for all of your life, this is the ideal, it does require us to know what our needs are, and also have the skills and ability to be able to define them and to speak up. And that's not easy for many of us. And, it's a sort of lifetime learning thing, because if you've grown up in a family where the boundaries are not well defined, particularly, for families that have had a loss at some point, a sudden loss, of a parent, or a sudden death in a family. It can also be in a family where someone has addiction. And so what happens is you don't actually learn how to take care of your needs. And so what I'm seeing in my clinic with clients is that often once clients start to realize what their needs are and really sort of be self-reflective and be able to engage themselves more in the relationship actually becomes less roller coaster and more ease.
Now, it's interesting, Jo-Anne, I was reading a book last night. I'm going to be interviewing this author in a couple of weeks, and it's about the cycles of what happens in relationships. And this is not just people who come from some kind of trauma or dysfunction, but just the hormones that we experience when we're in a new relationship. Our boundaries tend to be much more flexible, right? Like if our new guy wants to go hiking up Mount Kilimanjaro, we're like, yeah, okay, when really normally we wouldn't want to do that, right?
I know. There's when you fall in love, you get all these wonderful chemistries of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, and you have this feeling that you can climb Mount Kilimanjaro, or you can do anything, and after having this feeling, you want more of it. And so what happens often is a person might lose their boundaries, want to see that person more and more and more, and give up on all the things that really create a life as outside of the relationship. So they stop seeing their friends as much. They start saying no to other engagements just so that they can have more time with this new love of their life, and they lose their boundaries. So it's so important to know what makes you healthy and what you need in your life before you, at the early stages of the relationship, so you don't lose yourself in the context of wanting more of all those great drugs.
So Jo-Anne, how do you do that? Because when you are under, you basically are high on love chemicals in your body. So it doesn't seem, these little things that you might, if you weren't high on all these oxytocin and all of that, you might find these things annoying or whatever, but you let them go because it feels so good to be around this person initially. So how do you decipher between what you would normally do if you weren't high?
Yeah, and I think that's what inspired this series was, this book that I wrote about, really learning about yourself after a breakup, so that you actually learn how to love again. And, that really starting with yourself. So, really spending that time before you embark on dating again so that you actually are developing a really strong sense of 2 feet on the ground. I know what I need. I know what makes me healthy so that I can bring my healthiest version to a new relationship. And the trouble is a lot of people don't take that time to be self-reflective and go through a process of really understanding their relationship with themselves so that they know what they want. They're sort of looking for someone else to fill that gap.
Well, let's talk about being mindful of being too pleasing. We want to talk about, you've sent me this wonderful outline again, and maybe how you can know either while you're doing it or in hindsight when you've kind of given up on some of your boundaries.
Yeah, there is you'll start to have the sense of the line that I was talking about in our first session, and a sense of like listening to your body. Like if you get anxiety, if you're starting to get anxiety symptoms, there are things like, racing heart rate, some sort of sweating, a sense of dizziness and things like that, the sort of symptoms of anxiety, it's your body's way of shaking you to say, hey, pay attention. Ground yourself in what you need. Slow down just a little bit and listen to me. And so your body is a great vehicle for learning if we pay attention. And so just, if you're getting symptoms such as anxiety or you're having trouble sleeping, that could be another symptom. And you'll find yourself, if you pay attention to your body, it's a really great source of wisdom. And which will say, slow down, check in with yourself. What are you doing in terms of your own self-care? And just slow down the pace of engagement.
Now, how do we know, Jo-Anne, the difference between, because when people are initially in love, they can have trouble sleeping, they might have an increased heart rate, they don't want to eat as much generally because, like we said earlier, they're high on these love chemicals. Mm-hmm. So how do you know the difference between love chemicals and anxiety?
Yeah, so the love chemicals are the high. That's sort of the sense of invincibility that you're saying, that even though you've never hiked before, you might say yes to a trip to a hike up Kilimanjaro. And so where your own self-knowledge is put aside for the engagement with the love interest. And so, luckily we've got a whole lot of information if we pay attention. So one is our body. Our body may have symptoms of anxiety or trouble sleeping. And second is our friends. Our friends can be a wonderful resource for, as kind of a guide for you. So if your friends are saying, gee, I've been missing you at all of these things that we normally do, I really want to pay attention to that and make sure that I am actually pacing myself in the new relationship so that I'm still maintaining those other friendships. Your family is another resource. If they start to give you feedback that you're not yourself, when you're with this other person, then chances are you're maybe not being yourself. And so, that pleasing sort of personality is taking over from the authentic you. And so, if you're not being yourself in the relationship and you're trying to be your best version that you would assume is pleasing to the other person, eventually the relationship's not going to work out. So when someone says to you, I just miss the authentic you, what's going on, pay attention and sort of just sit back a bit and sort of think about, am I being myself?
And that Sorry, go ahead.
No, go. Is all of me showing up? So, we have these resources that are sort of built into growing up with friends and family, and they become great assets to developing a strong and long-term relationship.
That brings up another thought for me, Jo-Anne, but you also want to check in advance. And I think this is part of, your book, Break Up, Breakthrough, and Learning to Love Again, is really knowing yourself in advance, because a lot of people, some people have families who, if you were doing well, they would be bothered by that. So you also want to take it with a grain of salt. If you know that your family and your friends really are looking out for your own best interest, then you want to listen to what the feedback that they're giving you. But this person could be an amazing influence on your life, and your family may not like it because you're doing better than they are.
Yeah, and that is true too. In a family that tends to be quite fused, kind of very, very tight knit, and see that in some cultures more than others. There can be resistance to let somebody new in, and so there can be a reaction from the family like that. So you always end up checking in with yourself, not taking anybody else's wisdom over your own, right? So that's that sense of boundaries again, and it's a great example, Marie, that you don't just automatically agree with everything that people say to you, because anytime you're in a process of change, we can often doubt ourselves, and that's when self-knowledge is really important, and checking in with your boundaries about what is grist for the mill and what you want to just let go, because it's really more about them. And so it is really important. That's a great example of when boundaries become really important to know, to consider. With clients, actually, what I would do is I'll have you draw like a big circle on a page right now, and if you could imagine doing that right now, and if you draw lines going from the outside in. So it would describe and if you put a big heart in the middle of the circle, right now. When the way we develop through school is that information about ourselves is really all dependent on what the teacher grades you at. It's all very subjective to how your family defines you. You get identified in the roles of birth order, and all of that makes our boundaries that they're really permeable when we're young. We grow up sort of really being only as good as others define us as. And the thing is, we have to actually switch up that learning, because as an adult, we've got to be more internally based, and before we're ready for relationship, that heart is still in the center of that circle, but the arrows are pointing out. So we are really, by the time we are adult, able to define ourselves and our needs and our feelings, and paying attention to all of the internal resources we've got in how we feel and what we know. And so that transition from being externally based into being internally based is the transition and a way to understand when you're ready for a relationship.
All right. Well, what do you think is more important to talk about first, physical boundaries or communication?
Well, what would you like to talk about?
Well, I just had a communication thing happened yesterday, and I emailed you. Now, this isn't a romantic relationship, but I noticed it kind of overlaps when you talk about sharing private stories right away.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great example. And I love that you were defining your boundaries with this girlfriend of yours. And just for those that are listening in right now, Marie was describing an experience with a girlfriend who was wanting her to share information about her family, and you weren't in the choice of wanting to do that, and so you defined your boundaries with her. And your question was, how do you define your boundaries? And I thought you did such a great job of that. Often we can feel that because somebody wants information about our personal situation on anything, really, that we are sort of obliged to tell all to maintain the relationship. And in fact, after feel terrible that we've actually shared too much and maybe exposed we feel exposed or vulnerable having done that. So, having the boundaries to be able to say no, you do define a healthy relationship with your friend, because your friend is going to be your friend even in those times when you do say no. I don't want to talk about this today. It's not something that's pressing for me, and I want to maintain my happiness today, is kind of basically what you said. And that was a great example of a way to express your boundaries, because we don't always want to share, and if we do share more than we really want to, oftentimes we can come away feeling vulnerable in the sort of nakedness of the conversation, and wish that we had paced it more. So that's a great example of when boundaries are important.
Well, it's interesting, too, that just brings up a thought for me as well, because this person had shared I didn't ask for this information, and she's not really, she's barely an acquaintance, and she kind of dumped all of this childhood trauma story on me, and, I was like, wow, thank you for sharing that, and I was very empathic towards her, but then she wanted to know about all my childhood trauma, and this was through email, I started writing it out, and I started crying, and I was like, you know what, if I send this, she's going to respond back, and I'm going to end up spending my day talking about old stuff that makes me cry, which I don't want to do. So it wasn't that I was trying to withhold information from her. It's just that I didn't want to drudge this up today. There's times when it's appropriate and other times when it's not. And she was really offended. She seemed to have taken it personally that I didn't want to do that, and said that, I hadn't forgiven my mother, and all of these judgments that had everything to do with her and nothing to do with the reason that I was choosing not to share. But it's interesting because there is this reciprocity thing that we as humans have. If someone shares all their past, then they're like, oh, and what about you? A lot of times we feel really obligated to share because they've shared.
Yeah, and it's true. So two things you're kind of bringing up was, one is that you really wanted to preserve your good mood that day, and it's just you didn't want to kind of go into past pain, and what you found is you kind of ended up in this complicated experience with her, where then she is feeling that she's kind of said a lot, and she wants you to kind of have equal sharing. And that's a great example as well. And that happens oftentimes in the dating process as well, where when people are on their second date, for instance, they may overshare with prospective boyfriend or girlfriend, and what happens is that the other person feels overloaded. So I see that in my clinic as well. Like, it's sort of a sense that you've been out on a date and you really want to make that connection with the other person, and so you share kind of your whole life story, and without sort of thinking, now what is in their circle? I describe that circle thing, so everybody's got their own experience. So, what are their needs in the date as well? So am I overwhelming them in the date, and sort of sinking the experience of the date, or is it appropriate to share, based on their needs? So you kind of have to really communicate that, how is this for you, and do you want to talk about this, and really it's all about communicating. So pacing kind of how much you share with someone else. And in this case, your example is with a lifetime friendship, it sounds like. And so you would definitely have the strength in the relationship to just be honest, to say, I just feel really that I've got kind of hooked into this.
No, this was someone I barely know. I don't
Oh, okay, yeah. Well,
her.
Then, yeah, absolutely. No problem. What's the problem there?
Well, the thing is also, it's interesting, you'll notice, when I saw the reaction, that gives me more information. Really, setting boundaries is one way to keep yourself protected. It's also another way to maintain respect between two people. As well, it gives you a lot of information, the way that they react.
Yeah, it does give you information in the way they react, because that's information about, kind of the way they are in life. So somebody that tends to overshare sometimes can be somebody that will be a little bit more dramatic in life too. And so, we really are sussing out sort of ease in our life, right? So the more ease in your life, the more sort of overall comfort you've got, and capacity you'll have for your work and what have you. So the ability to, the sort of sense of when somebody overshares, often it's because they haven't really processed a lot of emotional stuff that they should have maybe seen a professional for. And so when they overshare, it's kind of a sign that, you're in for a bit of a roller coaster ride. And, the thing about it is that there is, a choice kind of thing. Like if you pace the relationship and go, a little bit slower in terms of how much you share, your chances are you're going to have a longer relationship with the person. It's kind of like the difference we feel on a Ferris wheel as opposed to a roller coaster. It's like roller coaster, hold on, here we go. Exciting, but, do you want to live every day like that? Maybe not so much.
It's interesting. This is all, the dynamics are so complex because there's reciprocation, there's give and take. Like if I share a little bit, then if it's an appropriate amount of sharing, one would expect reciprocation and the other person to share on that same level as well. Mm-hmm. But you do want to make sure that you aren't oversharing. But for someone, okay, so some people are very private people, and they don't share much at all, even they may withhold information or be dishonest even with the people who are very closest to them, because that was maybe part of their family dynamic. Mm-hmm. For me, I am very open. And I don't, unless it's something that could actually get me into trouble, it doesn't even enter my mind to try and withhold information. Yeah. So how do you balance that? Because, I share openly on the show, and then sometimes I wonder, because I don't know who's listening, right? I'm comfortable sharing with you. But
there's also sort of the sense that if you're with someone who doesn't really give you anything of their heart, or sort of isn't really sharing their stories, it doesn't feel very enriching an experience with them. You don't want to be dating or in relationship with a rock, So I think relationships have a way of finding a level of differentiation and ease. So if you'll find your perfect match if you just be yourself. It is nice to hear stories, and it is nice to know each other, and you kind of intuitively will know who you want to share your stories with, and who you might define your boundaries a little bit more with. So that sense of safety is something that's intuitive, and you pick that up in body language and your experiences with the person over time. The more you know them, the safer and deeper the relationship becomes. And so we kind of build attachments in being able to share our stories and know that they're safe and know that our best interests are in mind. And we have a hunger to connect as human beings, so of course we want to be able to share all of our stories with the people that really matter to us, that we actually are building those important relationships with.
But it sounds like, Jo-Anne, that you're saying it's really important to spend time and see how this person is over a longer period of time and in different shared experiences, rather than just, you could have a second date and have great chemistry and feel like this person is maybe your soulmate, and 6 weeks down the road you find out that he's like, or he or she is bent in some way. So, you might regret having shared all that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think there's a whole chapter that I've got in my book about pacing and how important and how you can pace the depth of the relationship. So if you go a little bit slower with it, chances are it's going to have a more of a long-term glide rather than a starburst burnout,
So what just briefly, what does pacing look like from a breakup breakthrough standpoint?
Well, when you've gone through a breakup, it's a big invitation to learn about yourself. And so spending time with yourself, so you really get to know who you are, what are your interests. When you've kind of got to a sense that you feel really good on your own, you can, go out socially and be on your own and just really enjoy the freedom and ease of just being you, then you're ready. And until you have that real sense of feeling whole, being out and about, you're not really ready. And I think oftentimes what I see is people who want to have that relationship happen as quick as possible because they kind of dread and fear that they'll never meet someone. And so rather than actually realize that the person they need to meet is themselves, So that's the thing. So it's just slowing it down a little bit. There was an article in the paper actually a couple of days ago in the Globe and Mail, and it talked about how these days that they were saying about women used to be thought to just engage without thinking about just about looking, being appealing to a man, let's just say in heterosexual relationships, they wouldn't actually be considering about their education and developing themselves. And in today's world, actually, for long-term relationships, the more education you have, the more long-term your relationship will last. So use the time when you're on your own to, upgrade yourself and be the iPhone upgrade, like spend some time and get to know yourself. Take a course in something, learn something new. Just really embrace the time. I like to say to my clients, this is the only time in your life you're going to be on your own, so really enjoy it. Don't be in a race to, be back in a relationship with somebody new again. Really spend the time and use it with the freedom to be able to, make what you want for dinner and take that course that you've always wanted to take and try out a new hobby. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we're speaking with Jo-Anne Weiler right now. She is the author of Breakup, Breakthrough, and Learning to Love Again. She's a registered clinical counselor, registered marriage and family therapist, and you can find her at joanneweiler.com. This is Synchronicity, talk radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Marie Benard. You can find me at spiritualshow.com, and we're talking about boundaries today with Jo-Anne Weiler. You can find her at joanneweiler.com. And it's interesting you were talking about while you're single, going out and doing the things that you might not otherwise have time for when you're in a romantic relationship. But isn't it also important when you're in that relationship to maintain some of the things that you might do if you weren't always with this person?
Yes, absolutely. And, the interesting thing in this defining of boundaries as well is to really consider what your lives look like as individuals kind of thing. So, one of the areas of conflict that can show up or areas of stress in relationship can be that if, say, for instance, one person travels a lot and they're away a lot, that can be really triggering for somebody who has higher needs for connection. And so that's something to really be considering as well when you're choosing, your ideal partner. And to be really clear about, what your lifestyle looks like in terms of time expectations. So there's a boundary conversation about lifestyle that is really important to have. Otherwise, you're going to be on that roller coaster ride that I was talking about where, you're really pulling for the person to be more available for you when in actual fact they can't be because of the travel expectations of their job. So that can be something to be talking about in the defining boundaries.
Okay, but then this is the thing, because you're both in this high. I mean, I've had this many times. I'm very upfront. I've, met guys where I could tell right away you don't have time for the level of attention that I need. And if a guy or if someone is really attracted to you and they're high on those love drugs, they're not considering the reality. Mm-hmm. They're considering the rose-colored glasses version of course, I'm always going to feel this way about you, and so I'll make time for you. And 6 months or 2 years into a relationship, when all of those chemicals have worn off, mm-hmm. the reality is that they're not going to be able to do that. And it's not necessarily that they're lying. They really might believe that in the moment. So I think that's another reason why the pacing is so important, because 3 weeks into a relationship, people are much more optimistic about how many resources they have.
Yeah, and I just, I kind of, I think that for people to keep both feet grounded, one foot is in the emotional brain and sort of all of that enjoying of the, drug fest that's going on with this love elixir. And the other is in this grounded, left brain experience of really assessing out what, who is this person really and what is their lifestyle, what comes with them. So looking at, their career, and what are the time demands of the career, and also what is the history for them as well in terms of past relationships, and sort of considering, like, if they've had a lot of job changes and a lot of short-term relationships, they may be someone that is has trouble with commitment, and you may end up in a push-pull and trying to, get them to be more committed. So it's worthwhile looking at that. So you just really want to kind of keep your left brain engaged in that period of time. So I kind of think about standing on 2 feet, your left brain and your right brain, sort of making sure that you're you're sussing out the emotional brain as well as the practical part of life. And because the more stress in any relationship, the harder time you're going to have. And so it's not just time commitment, but it's also economical as well. So, what's their financial life like? Because if they have real difficulties in, budgeting their life, then that may also present some stresses into the relationship. And, that shows up in the dating process if we pay attention,
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess what I was saying is that it doesn't, of course, it matters how grounded you are, mm-hmm. but no matter how grounded you are, you can't account for what the other person will be like, especially because you don't know them that well yet. So they could say, yeah, I'm totally being grounded. This is a rational decision, that they may not even be aware that they're living in fantasy land.
Yeah, it's hard because everybody wants to present the best part of them in the early stages. And in fact, it is the best part of them that's showing up. There's real motivation to spend time with you, and they want that feeling more, so they're spending more time with you. But that's what I mean. You need to sit back a little bit as well and really keep both feet grounded in, and really sort of sussing out sort of the history that they've had, and knowing that, we are human and we tend to, show up again as the same person. So we don't really change that much since 5 or 6 years old. We maybe get a bit smarter, but sometimes I wonder. So, yeah. But so does that answer that?
I think so, yeah. And Jo-Anne, you have a little framework for how to talk with your partner. I feel blank when you blank. How can we get better at this? Can we talk about that?
Yeah. It's the sense of, like, really just checking in with your body. And so if you're, struggling in a sense of, say, for instance, you've had a conversation and you keep coming back to that same conversation with the other person, just take a moment, first of all, and be a little bit reflective about, what does this mean for me? And when you've figured it out, let's just say the person is traveling a lot. Let's just use that dynamic. And so you're frustrated because you're not seeing them as much. So you might actually think to yourself, well, what does that mean to me? Well, it means I'm on my own. And so if that's a problem, it means that socially I'm going to parties on my own, and basically, I'm kind of a solo agent in my life, and I don't want to be. So what you'd come back and you'd say to the person is, I feel lonely a lot of the time because you're traveling quite a bit. And so how can we get better at our time spent together or something like that? It would be, the conversation starts with I. So I'm not going to come on with, you are not a good partner, you travel too much to be in a relationship, but you're actually talking about it from an I place. Like, I feel lonely because I'm missing you, and how can we, so you're brainstorming with the person to bridge that. And it's either going to give you a resolution or it will define sort of the relationship being a misfit.
And again, when I feel like it's important to start using this fairly early on, because when you do set the boundaries, again, you're getting more information. If this person can't handle having boundaries set or having these conversations come up, when you are really gentle about it and express your feelings and don't put it on them, then you're getting more information about whether this person's actually capable of what you need.
Yeah, you're coming from compassion and also just your own knowing, because that's all we ever really know. And so you're creating an openness for them to not feel, like a neophyte. They actually are just in maybe an unconscious thing, that they may want to look at or not look at. If they don't look at it and want to create change, then it's information for you to then consider, what do I want to do next? Do I want to feel lonely for the rest of my life? Or if this is unresolvable, for them to make change, then I really have to kind of make that hard decision about whether this is the right relationship to pursue.
So what do you do when you're with someone who either doesn't express their needs because they tend to withhold, or they don't express their needs because they're people pleasers? I mean, both are a problem, because you're going along in your relationship thinking everything's fine. Mm-hmm. And then one day they've made this decision without ever speaking to you about it that you're not compatible.
Yeah, that's really, and that's where emotional intelligence comes in. It's really learning to pick up on the body cues and the habits that suggest that there's something that's going wrong. What I try to do with couples is get them into a practice of this reflective dialogue, so that they're developing kind of a language around being able to really hear the other person and sort of stay connected in that way. So what you would do is that on a pretty regular basis, sit down face to face and just one person talks, the other one listens, and is just an emotional mirror to the other person. So they just kind of go through their day, and you're not sorting out anything. You're actually just really present for the other person. And in that experience, you're going to stay connected. And so having some kind of practice on a regular basis, choose a time, try to do it every day, just that you've got a practice of really knowing where the other person's at.
All right. Well, we have just a few minutes left in the show, so let's talk about physical boundaries.
Okay. Yeah. Well, physical boundaries, it's an interesting thing. So in relationship with others, when we are partners with someone, we're also partners in their workplace and, sort of being an advocate for them doing really well in life. And so physical boundaries, I think, can be, for instance, when you go to your partner's work, situation, that you're, really being supportive in what they need and having the conversation about, being supportive and so it's that. It's so, for instance, it's also, physical boundaries can be also sort of an energy, right, that you are a certain way at a situation like that, as opposed to how you might be at, say, I don't know, we go to this fitness class on Saturday mornings, and my girlfriends and I are completely silly at it. It's a different kind of let loose kind of energy. So that's actually, does that make sense?
So are you talking about matching the energy of the room kind of thing?
Yeah, what's appropriate for what situations. So the kind of energy that you bring to a workplace situation when you're there as a partner is maybe a little bit conservative or appropriate for whatever the work culture is, as opposed to when you're free and breezy in a in a situation that you just get to let your, silly side forward. And so another example would be, for instance, also, when you're in a situation where you're having a few drinks, sometimes what I hear from couples is the mismatch in what's appropriate with drinking. So alcohol can get in the way and overstep boundaries because some people are a little bit looser, and it can be embarrassing for a partner, for instance, when alcohol impacts. So that's something else that is something to have a conversation about.
But there's also, because I dated someone who, this is one of the withholding people who didn't tell me there was a problem till the end, where we would go to, he was super conservative.
Okay.
In everything. Like, he wouldn't dance. He was just always very conservative. And so when we were around my friends, I was appropriate to that situation, which he was uncomfortable with, because I guess he worried I would be that way around his friends. But he's super conservative. I wouldn't be that way around his friends. And when I met his family, I was, it was a totally appropriate situation. But just my free-spiritedness, I think it created anxiety for him.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because that's a perfect example that, probably, this was a former relationship that wasn't really well matched. We should be able to be, kind of ourselves. So the way you are with your friends is really probably authentic you, and the way he is with his friends is probably authentic him. So you can see how those things didn't fit together very easily, and why your friends can also be a way of knowing your partner. And so, typically the best fit are ones that are aligned. So you both have the similar kind of way of being at a party. You want to have fun and be silly, and that's, hopefully the way your partner is as well.
But is that, because sometimes aren't people usually often attracted to, I like someone who's a little more conservative, or at least not, I like being the wild free spirit in the relationship. I definitely, if there's someone who's more out there than I am, that makes me a bit nervous.
Okay.
But, do you have to be with someone who's so similar in personality?
Yeah, well, we call that as a complementary relationship, and oftentimes it works really well to have a complementary relationship where one person's more of an anchor, a little bit more conservative, and then the other person benefits in the sense of feeling safe with that person, and then the reciprocity is the sense that that person gets a little bit more free-spiritedness from the partner who has the ability to just let loose and be silly sometimes. So there is a complementary relationship there, and those work really nicely. There's not sort of one formula that is the ultimate, but just know that the more aligned you are in your natural states and what you naturally want, probably the more ease in your relationship. There's less disturbance, let's say. And so, it's kind of a common, there's more common ground. It's just easier, but it doesn't mean that complementary relationships aren't a great idea. They work really nicely. And the other thing, too, is that when you, say, for instance, if you're attracted to somebody who is a bit more conservative, possibly you're wanting to grow into a little bit more of that ability. And that is inside you. That is part of who you are, Marie. So you have that conservative part of you, too. And so you're attracted to somebody who's bringing that out in you, but it is within you.
Well, I think it's interesting what you said about being the anchor, because I feel like, yes, if I'm with someone who is very more gregarious and more outgoing and all of that than I am, then I feel like I'm the one that has to be the responsible one. And
okay.
I'm capable of doing that, but I would rather just be able to be myself and not have to monitor this person.
I know. Yeah. So you can see why when you're with someone who can have that ease to be all like whole, right? That sense of like I can be silly, but at the same time kind of parent myself in a way that I know when I need to kind of anchor and tone it down a little bit. I can personally gauge myself, and I've got that ability to self-soothe and self-regulate. So self-regulation is like, if I have a kind of buoyancy and an energy that I want to just play, but I'm going to a situation that calls for a more conservative part of me, I'm going to self-regulate. So I'm going to make sure that I manage my buoyancy so that it's appropriate for where I'm going. So that's, it's that ability to do that ourselves. And when we can do that and sort of, it's not like we're hungry to have somebody else fit that missing piece of ourselves. We are whole and have that whole ability. I think kind of, growing up possibly is the sense of becoming parent to the self so that we are mom and dad to ourselves. We have a sense of the nurturing mother within ourselves so we can feel kind and compassionate to ourselves. And at the same time, we have that backbone that a father provides, which is the structures of what's right and what's wrong and sort of the structures of life. So growing up is kind of the sense of I can be father to myself and I can be also mother to myself, and both of those are within me and within my own boundary learning.
Okay, but then if I'm going to be everything to myself, why bother being in a relationship? Because people are a pain in the butt, really. I mean, they are. As much as I love them.
Relationships are the only way we grow. And, the thing is actually we do grow and evolve through relationships. And so relationships develop us because they do stimulate us and irritate and give us those pee in our mattress kind of thing, that sense, that kernel that makes us want to kind of grow and be curious. So we can't grow without, and I think the other thing too is that as a human species, we're meant to be connected. We need each other. We need each other. That's the bottom line. We really do. A sunset is just a sunset until you share it with someone else.
All right. Well, we have just a few minutes left in the show. We're talking with Jo-Anne Weiler. She is the author of Break Up, Breakthrough, and Learning to Love Again. She's a registered clinical counselor, a registered marriage and family therapist, and you can find her at joanneweiler.com. So you mentioned on your outline here about paying on dates.
I know.
So let's talk about that, because the dynamic has kind of changed in the last couple
I know.
decades.
And it's a good thing it has kind of to some degree. But yes, who pays on a date? That's a question, and also just part of defining financial boundaries in a relationship that's developed. And so really just having an ease to talk about money. I mean, money, I think in my parents' era was kind of the, unfeminine discussion. You don't talk about such things. And I think that's just hogwash, I say. Hogwash. We should talk about money. It's absolutely one of the biggest stressors for relationships, and having a conversation about money is the way we get better in our lives. So there's a sense of expectation when you go on a date, who's going to pay, and you might alternate, or it may be important to you if, for your own learning that you, as a woman, want to be taken out for a date, and that, your date pays and courts you and kind of that sort of thing. It depends on where you're at and what your needs are. And so, but, just being clear about that and having a conversation. If you're in a developed relationship with someone that you're dating for a while, you might have a shared visa that you use the same visa for all your dates and then just pay it off equally or portion to what your incomes are. So if he makes or if she makes 60% more than he does, then it would be 60-40 or vice versa.
Well, that's interesting. How do you, because for me, I like when a man courts me. I like when a man pays. In fact, if he doesn't pay, I feel hurt. I feel like he doesn't like me.
It's loaded, isn't it? I mean, it can have so much meaning.
And the thing is that it's not, because a lot of people will, oh, well, she's a gold digger. He could take me for a $2 coffee. It doesn't have to be a big expensive dinner. In fact, if I notice a guy lavishing me with a lot when I know I know what he does for a living. He doesn't make $200,000 a year, yet he's spending $300 on dinner. I'm kind of maybe a little bit worried about his spending, right?
Well, yeah, and here's the thing is unconsciously you are sussing out whether or not he will be able to provide. If you decided that you wanted to create a family one day, is this person someone who can provide through those childbearing early stages of family? And so those things are going on as well, and also you're wanting someone to court you, and you want to be the girl in the relationship, and I love that, right? It's just sort of nice to be taken out and to be courted, and also that it can be a bit of an indicator that if he's struggling to pay for a date, is that an indicator for for him having financial stress? And if he's got a lot of financial stress, then that's going to be a stress in your relationship in the future. So,
well, how do you navigate that when, a lot of people are going through financial stress right now, and I think that it actually does impact the level of confidence that a person has, whether it's a man or a woman, when economic times are tough, which they have been for a while.
I know. It's true. And again, what you talk about, you can get better at. So it is hard to, it's expensive. I know in Vancouver here, it's an expensive city to live in. And so how do we become partners financially? And so that's conversations. It's not going out for $100 dinner, going out for, a $40 dinner. If the conversation has happened and you're checking in with each other about, what kind of financial pressures are going on, you can plan around that. So it's really, how do you communicate that? Just show up. You know what I mean? Like the two of you show up and practice talking about money.
All right. Well, it's already time to wrap up. The hour has flown by, Jo-Anne. Thank you so much for being with me.
It has, yeah. I also wanted to say that I'm giving a talk this Thursday night at the West Van Community Center on moving forward from a breakup and learning to love again. And so if anybody's interested, it's a free talk. It's at 7:00.
All right. Yeah, I was just going to ask you what you'd like to close with.
Thanks. Well, you know what? There's a little saying I've got out of this book that I sometimes draw from, and it says, "The greatest of knowledge is to know that knowledge cannot be known." And it's written by Chuang Tzu, and it's out of a book called Awakenings, the Asian Wisdom for Every Day. And I think that's what I'd like to end with. We're all in a process of really discovery of ourselves and discovery of each other.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much, Jo-Anne. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Marie.
Take care. Have a great day. Thanks.
You too. Bye.
Bye. So again, that was Jo-Anne Weiler, registered clinical counselor, registered marriage and family therapist. She's also the author of Break Up, Breakthrough, and Learning to Love Again. And you can find her at joanneweiler.com. This has been Synchronicity, talk radio for your mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Marie Benard. Thank you so much for being with me. I hope that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Be well. I love you so much. Namaste.